Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of Hardwood Knocks. This is Adam Frommel here with my fantastic co-host, Dan Favale. We are deep in the midst of the first weekend of the 2021 NBA playoffs. We've had a number of compelling games so far. We're going to talk about those and all of the questions that you, the listeners, have submitted. But before we do that, as always, how's it going, Dan?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I am doing pretty solid.
You built a sandbox over the weekend.
Rumor is correct. Yeah, we did it from scratch for my toddler. We still have to put like a roof over it to protect the sand from the neighborhood raccoons and the elements in general. But it was a shockingly long and arduous process.
Well, I'm sure your son will appreciate it. I had a speaker request before I made you the host. Do you still have it? Did that go away?
It went away because I think they left the room.
All right. They didn't want to ask that question off. So.
But I am always curious about the speaker request before we've started recording.
But yeah, well, congrats to your son. What have you, before we get to all these questions, if anyone in the room has a question, feel free to ask it in the chat or request to speak. Any early playoff impressions, play-in tournament hot takes, since those were flying around after the Warriors lost?
I don't think anything surprised me that much in this first set of games. It seems like the teams that had to fight a little bit harder with a shorter rotation at the end of the regular season suffered for it in the play-in game, namely the Golden State Warriors against the Memphis Grizzlies, the Denver Nuggets against the Portland Trailblazers in game one. But I don't think any outcomes are truly surprising to this point.
I'm kind of with you. I think I might have missed on the Nuggets-Blazers series a ton, though. I had Nuggets in 7, but kind of watching the Blazers offense and just a lack of bodies and then firepower on the Nuggets end outside of Jokic, it does seem like Portland's very much going to play. Jokic can drop 30-something a night and be efficient for most of the night, and we don't care. We're going to make everyone else beat us. And I know Michael Porter Jr. won't shoot 1 of 10 from 3 every single night, but if you don't get Will Barton back in this series, or if you don't get PJ Dozier back to help you defend McCollum and Dame,
or good Monte Morris.
Yeah, I'll never back off my picks, but that's the one I feel shakiest about at the moment. Well, that, and I had Clippers in 5. That was a terrible pick. That's just.
I think the biggest thing though is just not taking too much away from game one, because I think historically, like, the winner of game one only wins the first round series like 52% of the time or something like that.
Oh, I thought it was in the 60s, but I haven't checked probably in 2 years, so that's not. Don't go off me.
But we do have our first speaker request, so I'm going to assume that's a question here, and I will invite you to speak. Lil Trae Wallace, how's it going today?
I'm going good. Just watching the Lakers and the Suns.
Yeah, talk about an interesting early start here with DeAndre Ayton just going off.
DeAndre's just torching AD right now.
Yeah. So did you have a question for us?
Yeah. Well, we're going to talk about the game ones from yesterday. Yeah, the Bucks barely survived against the Heat. And the Clippers are still the Clippers. And the Blazers beat the Nuggets. And the Nets destroy the Celtics.
Yeah, we can definitely elaborate on those a little bit here. Dan, did you have any thoughts on the Bucks in particular?
Yeah, the Bucks are legit as hell, because I thought that more so going into the playoffs to begin with, but you won a game where Giannis shoots 10 of 24 from 2, so that's 41.7%, 6 of 13 at the foul line. The Bucks as a whole were trash from the foul line. They were 5 of 31 from 3, which was the first time they shot under 17% from 3 while taking at least 20 attempts since 2018. Ironically, that game was also against the Heat. And the other thing that's just not being talked about, Drew Holiday and Giannis, I don't know if you saw when I tweeted this out, they combined for more turnovers than assists. The Bucks still won that game. I know Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo struggled.
Right, that's what I was going to say, is like the devil's advocate here is that Butler shot 4 of 22 and Tyler Hero shot 2 of 10 and Bam Adebayo couldn't buy a bucket. So does that negate itself?
No, because first of all, Tyler Hero, that's going to happen. It happened a little bit last year in the bubble, even though he was hot, and that's his game. He's going to be up and down, and this year he's been mostly down, although he had a nice close to the season. I will also argue that Bam will be better, but like Bam is not, even when you look at his numbers, Bam is not a scorer. They need him to be more aggressive, and until he gets to that point, Like I think Jimmy's struggles are the ones that will correct themselves, and maybe you'll get a better version of Dragic, perhaps. But the fact that the Bucks were, you still have Chris Middleton, but that's sort of the point, is that now all of a sudden they have these closers galore where it's Giannis and Drew and Chris Middleton, and you have two players, I think, that you can reasonably put the ball in their hands in the half court in Drew and Chris Middleton when things are at a standstill in crunch time. And we saw that. They went to Drew a bunch. He wasn't great, beat up some guys in the post, though, and that created opportunities. And then Middleton was obviously the hero there. I picked the Bucks in 5 in that one. I don't know what made me pick all these 5-game series. I must have been, I don't know if I was stoned when I did that podcast, but I don't feel terrible about that pick. It's no Mavs and Clippers.
Yeah, I mean, I really am just playing devil's advocate because my primary takeaways from that game are all positive from Milwaukee, especially just looking at the rotations. The fact that Mike Budenholzer only played 9 guys in that game, the fact that he kept the starters on for the entire overtime period, and even more importantly, Giannis played 40 minutes and 27 seconds in regulation. When was the last time we could say that in a postseason game? So it feels like all of those critiques of the Bucks that helped explain these playoff shortcomings in previous seasons, those are slowly being eradicated. And this Milwaukee team is supremely talented, and beating the Heat is not an easy feat in the playoffs when they're coached by Eric Spoelstra, despite the shooting woes of the Stars.
And the other thing here, too, is that I know Giannis did not have the greatest game, and he looked like he tweaked his, I don't know if it was his hip or what happened at the beginning of the game or earlier in the game. He's going to have better nights, and I don't think the Heat necessarily defended him particularly well. They went with Trevor Ariza a bunch, but then they went with Bam Adebayo when it matters. That's where you miss Jay Crowder probably the most, is because he was the one that defended Giannis primarily last year. So you could have Bam mucking things up as the helper. If you have him on Giannis, it makes sense. I'm not, you can't criticize Spo if they go that route for most of the game from now on, but then it takes him away from doing a lot of the other things that not only make him great, but make the Heat defense so dangerous. Right.
Yeah, I think, and then with the other 3 games, I think I was a little bit surprised that Brooklyn didn't win more easily. And the other 2 series, I don't have a feel for them yet. Portland and Denver, it feels like it could go either way any given night. And kind of the same for Dallas and LA.
Yeah, we have questions on some of these series too. And let's start with one that, as of this recording, has yet to be played. At the Lions King asks, why are the Jazz being slept on as championship contenders?
I don't know. It's like, it baffles me because they're my pick to win it all. I'm on the record with a Jazz Bucks finals with the Jazz winning in 7 games.
You sure not Jazz Sixers?
I confused myself because I've waffled between the Sixers and Bucks, but it is officially on the record. The corrected version is Jazz versus Bucks.
So, yeah, you're the wrong person to ask that question. I think the Jazz are legit contenders, but some of the reasons that they're being slept on, most notably the Gobert being played off the floor stance, are bullshit.
Right. That was multiple years ago. That season's team was, I believe, 14th in offensive rating, so they didn't have that offensive juggernaut to fall back on. This year's is 4th in offensive rating and 3rd in defensive rating during the regular season. This is a great two-way team, but I think the other reason is last year's shortcoming, where Bojan Bogdanovic was hurt, Mike Conley hadn't been fully integrated into the rotation. Neither of those are issues now. This is a complete team, and it's a dominant team.
The 2 things that concern me the most would be, and we've talked about this ad nauseum here, the absence of that clear bigger wing defender. Royce O'Neal's a little small. He'll help you when you're going up against guards, for sure. Anyone in the backcourt, really. After that, Joe Ingles can help you, but that's not who you want checking LeBron or Kawhi or Paul George, for that matter, because they would be slated to meet the Clippers in the second round, which I think is, I say it's a terrible draw, but the Clippers are the Clippers. And anytime you want to think you're going to trust the Clippers, you end up not trusting the Clippers because the Clippers are the Clippers. That's my justification there. The other thing, which I actually think is probably more salient, I've seen people focus a lot on how their offense will fare in the postseason. They're going to be fine. Maybe they don't generate looks as easily, but we've actually seen them, before they were as talented as this team, generate high quality looks in the playoffs. They just weren't hitting them. The players they have now are going to hit them. They were 1st in the league during the regular season in effective field goal percentage on pull-up jumpers. The actual concern at this point is Donovan Mitchell didn't play towards the end of the regular season because of that sprained ankle. And now he's going to, maybe the rest does him well, but you are asking him to come back all of a sudden in the playoffs. How long does it take to ramp him back up? And the Grizzlies are going to go at you. Dylan Brooks is going to try and be physical with him and will be physical with him. That's a matchup to really watch. They're not going to lose to the Grizzlies. And I shouldn't dismiss the Grizzlies so easily because I did when we were doing previews for every series. I went right into Warriors Jazz and only spent like 5 minutes on Grizzlies Jazz. The Donovan Mitchell thing concerns me. I think because they're so much better than their first round opponent, though, it does give him that leeway to work himself back into the action. Even him and Mike Conley, who missed a bunch of time towards the end of the year, too.
I kind of think it's a blessing in disguise that it's not a more severe injury, that he was able to take it so easy at the end of the regular season and get more rested up for this playoff run, because the Jazz were another team that played deep into the bubble season and didn't have as long an off season. And I don't mind that that's the way the end of the regular season worked out for them. I think it could be pretty beneficial.
The economy is made up of real people doing real stuff, and it affects everything. Which you obviously know since you're a real person doing real stuff. Marketplace is here to help you get smart about everything beyond the what of the day's business and economic news. We dig into the how and the why with the real people driving our economy. From big tech and interest rates to small businesses and what's happening at the Fed. Marketplace breaks it all down so you don't have to. Listen to Marketplace wherever you get your podcasts.
Some cars are comfy on the inside but don't have power on the outside. And some cars have the horsepower but none of the comfort. I used to think there weren't any cars that were the total package. But that all changed when I got my Honda SUV. It's rugged and sophisticated, and right now, Honda has deals on the entire Honda SUV lineup. CR-V, HR-V, Pilot, Passport, you name it. So if you're looking for a car that's the total package, the only place you'll find it is at your local Honda dealer. Hurry before they're all gone.
We do have a question in the chat right now from longtime faithful listener Noah Odich. He asks, what happens to the Hawks offense when Frank Ntilikina, I'm going to keep saying it like that for you, Dan, effectively shuts down Trae Young? And Noah, I'm just confused by the question because when Trae Young gets shut down, they don't have an offense.
This year, they have a little bit more of an offense. When Bogdanovich coming on has been huge for them. I will say, if Frank Ntilikina does not play at least 15 to 20 minutes per game in this series, my prediction would be that the Knicks have lost it because they don't have anyone else who makes sense to defend Trae Young. Maybe Reggie Bullock, maybe. But that's just, I don't know. I don't think that they should be starting Elfrid Payton. I would start Frank Ntilikina or Alec Burks if I were them. See, I'm not even saying just Frank. I understand that you want someone who can maybe get you into your offense. I personally think that if you put someone like Ntilikina on the floor, it would force RJ Barrett to be more aggressive. But Ntilikina needs to play this series. And I know Tom Thibodeau is tiptoed around it saying he might play him. I have two concerns there. These aren't questions so much as just observations. I'm kind of tired of hearing Tom Thibodeau compliment Frank Ntilikina so much only to not play him. It bugs the hell out of me. I'm not saying it's fake, but if you have this much faith in him, why not play him? And then two, with that, I've already touched upon this. I still don't understand the Elfrid Payton stuff. If you're not going to start Ntilikina, start Alec Burks. I understand not wanting to start Derrick Rose because of what that could do for your bench. The him and IQ minutes have been fire. It shouldn't be Elfrid Payton. And this is the series where that could come back to haunt you. If Elfrid Payton is the one that winds up defending Trae Young, and you even do that till the 6:36 mark or whatever the trademark minute is where you pull him, that's like 5 minutes of Trae Young potentially just going bonkers. And that's,
Trae can do a lot of damage in those 5 minutes.
Correct.
We also have a live update here.
I saw this
during the podcast. I don't have the Lakers Suns game on because we're recording here. Have it a pause to watch later. But per Mike Trudell at Lakers Reporter, looked like Chris Paul hurt his neck/upper back area by making contact with teammate Cam Johnson after landing, trying to contest a putback layup from LeBron. He just walked off straight to the locker room. Sounds like he was in a lot of pain on the floor. Players from both teams surrounding him. That would be a disaster for the Suns. I don't think there's any way around that.
You immediately waive Cam Johnson.
Right.
And I'm not trying to make light of it, but they'd be fucked. Pardon my French.
Yeah, we both picked the Suns in this first round series. That immediately changes. Without Chris
Lakers
Paul, I'm not making that pick. Yeah.
It's Lakers in 3 without Chris Paul.
There's nothing that you can do to replace those minutes. So,
go ahead. Sorry.
all the best thoughts to Chris Paul right now.
Yeah, no, seriously. And we want to see good series, and this I think would have shaped up to have been a good one. And I do have it on here. I saw him get injured and had my fingers crossed it wasn't serious, but it's on mute, so I didn't know the context. Another playoff question from @Nugget1105. Does Boston have any chance of winning?
No.
It's over. And I think game one is almost a disaster in the sense you hold the Nets to under 105 points and you still lose.
How do you score 93 points against that Brooklyn defense?
Kemba Walker plays like not a very good player. Jason Tatum, life was made hell on Jason Tatum. That's where they really missed Jaylen Brown. And the defense, the Nets weren't keying in on Kemba Walker the way that they were Jason Tatum. You saw Jeff Green and Kevin Durant defend Tatum a bunch, but that was just like the kitchen sink was thrown at Jason Tatum. And that they're able to do that defeats the purpose of having Kemba Walker. And I do think after this series, if Kemba Walker, no one expects the Celtics to win, but if he doesn't have like 2 or 3 straight games of close to vintage Kemba performances, there are so many conversations that need to be had about Kemba's place in the league overall and where the Celtics go from here. He has 2 years left on his max deal. They're not going to win anything with this version of Kemba Walker. And I know he's been banged up this year, oblique and knee issues. Still, like that's just the reality of Boston's situation. They need Kemba to be, right now he has to be their second best player, but you have to look at this through the lens of, can he even be our third or fourth best player next year?
I think players like LeBron James and Chris Paul have kind of made us forget that for primary ball handlers who are tasked with initiating a lot of offense, 31 is usually that magic age where you see the sudden drop-offs. And Kemba turned 31 earlier in May. Like, it's not inconceivable that we've just seen the last of vintage Kemba, sad as that may be. But to answer the original question, like, I'd be downright shocked if this is anything more than a gentleman's sweep.
Yeah, I believe I had the Nets just sweeping them outright because Jaylen Brown means that much to them. I don't even like, what's the bright spot for the Celtics Nets? I guess Robert Williams, he put on a shot blocking clinic. I did see though that only one of his 9 blocks resulted in the Celtics winding up with possession. The rest went out of bounds or ended up in the Nets' hands. I think that does show that there's limited value to shot blocking. It's important, but steals and forcing turnovers are way more important.
There are shot blocking artists throughout NBA history who were uniquely adept at keeping the ball in bounds or swatting into their teammates. Bill Russell famously was able to start fast breaks off of his blocks. Tim Duncan was an absolute master at keeping them in bounds. Shaquille O'Neal loved swatting them into the 14th row of the stands. One of those things is more valuable than the others.
I will also say, though, that Robert Williams looks like he got a lot better in one-on-one situations where he held up on some switches. Maybe that's the bright spot is, okay, center of the future here. Let's move forward. We have to trade Kemba. That's the discussion that's happening this year.
That's all Hardwood Knocks nominee, Robert Williams, by the way.
Oh, yes, I forgot. Congratulations to you.
Thank you.
We have some other playoff-related questions here. At Karan K. Hanna, or Karan Khanna, I apologize if I butchered the hell out of that pronunciation. Hi, can you find some data on AD's offensive efficiency and Lakers' overall driving paint finishing when Drummond is on the court? And I can, because you asked so politely. You said hi. I really appreciate that. So I brought up some numbers here because I'm assuming you don't have those off of top of mind. Maybe you do because you're a genius. But this season, AD is taking a career low 32% of his field goal attempts at the rim. And a career high 53% are coming from mid-range. A lot of that, I think, has to do, I mean, even now, but at the beginning of the season, and it was point blank said, he wasn't in the best shape after the championship run, and he was injured. I think that really contributed to the diminished volume at the basket. He is still shooting like 75% at the rim, and that's a career high. So there is that to consider. He is shooting on those mid-range attempts, though, 43%. Which is tied for the second best mark of his career. So at least those aren't the attempts that you want, but when he's not hitting threes at an astronomical clip, the fact that he has that in his arsenal is huge. I do think they need him to get to the basket more. And that brought me up to a piece of trivia for you, Adam, concerning Anthony Davis. When is the last time that roll man possessions accounted for at least 20% of Anthony Davis's offense?
I feel like there's a solid chance this is a trick question and it's never happened. So I'm going to go with his rookie season back in 2012-13.
It was 2016, 2017.
Okay.
But it's been...
Still in New Orleans.
And look, it's been a half decade. The thing here is he became such a great player. He didn't only have to be a play finisher, so I get why that volume would dip. This season, and it was even last season, 14.7% of his offensive possessions came as the roll man. Not particularly efficient, shot 55.8% on them. A lot more popping there. His effective field goal percentage was around 60 in these situations. That's great. And then last season was kind of the same story, 12.7%. So it's only a tick up. I don't know if this has to do with the Lakers spacing or what. I would love to see Anthony Davis involved in way more pick and roll than he is now. I understand he's so much more than a play finisher, but if you give him the wiggle room to maneuver, and I think when you're playing him at the 4, he probably doesn't have it as much, especially if the other big is Andre Drummond on the court. That just feels like you're leaving money on the table by not using him more as the diver.
Look, I'm going to channel my inner Charles Barkley and Shaquille O'Neal here, which is like buried deep somewhere in the recesses of my psyche.
So you're going to say you haven't watched any of the games and you slept through them and you're going to give your opinions anyway?
Yeah, essentially. Okay. But anecdotally, I think Anthony Davis spends too much time on the perimeter. And I'm in no way one of those people who's like, oh, we need the traditional big man play, like bring back the post up, blah, 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 blah. But he does. It feels like the Lakers use him just spotting up on the wings a little bit too much and take him away from his strengths. I don't know if that's the scheme that Frank Vogel has designed, if that's Anthony Davis just not wanting to play the 5 in any way, latter, shape, right? Or form. Maybe.
Because
I don't know.
If you have another big on the floor,
he's so good around the basket. You're taking away such a dangerous, devastating weapon from that offense.
I think part of it is out of necessity because he's the second big on the floor. And unless that other big is this season, let's look at Marc Gasol. If it's Trez, if it's Drummond, he can't be that guy because they have to be that guy.
Right. Or they could play him at the 5 and not have him be the second big. One of the two, really. We never talked about that latter point before.
I used to think I was oversimplifying it by saying that players need to stop with the, I don't want to play this position, that position, until Mo Dakhil, former video coordinator for 2 NBA teams and the Australian national team, I believe, told me that it is absolute BS and that they should, for Anthony Davis, I know he wants to fly around the perimeter on defense. Is he really getting, he gets banged up enough? He's on the floor all the time. Maybe if he's guarding centers, he actually won't have to move as much and won't get injured or whatever. But
he's going to take shots to the face wherever he is because he's Anthony Davis and that's his thing. Right.
So this is like Melo not wanting to play the 4 way back when all over again. Really quickly on the Drummond stats. So the Lakers, 4.3% more of their shots come from short mid-range when he's on the court. 1.4% of their rim frequency drops. So the percent of shots that are coming at the rim when he's on the court are dipping by 1.4%. I actually do think that's his fault a little bit, just because he's going to bail out of some of his roles a little too soon and throw up those junky short mid-rangers, as we just alluded to. When you're looking at the accuracy in those situations, Los Angeles' accuracy at the rim drops by 2.9 percentage points when Drummond is on the court. The short mid-range accuracy drops by 4.9 percentage points. Those are very not good numbers. Look,
those are not very good numbers.
This is going to be so dated, but for anyone who has not had the update on Chris Paul or is listening live, he will return to Game 1.
Well, he's available to return to Game 1. We don't yet know if he will, right?
Well, he better. I have Suns in 7. Come on,
right.
CP3, let's go.
Right.
I do. We have 2 questions on the Warriors that I guess I'll save because they are interesting. We have, because it's the Hardwood Knocks podcast, we do have a Nikola Jokic question.
It wouldn't be an episode without one.
This comes from @Christopher. Asks, Jokic has been the best player in the league this season and deserves MVP, but where would he rank among players overall? I'd assume LeBron, KD, and Steph are still better, but it's hard to say that with how the season has gone. There are 2 different ways to look at this question before I hand you the talking stick. Would be this season specifically, where did he rank? Or if you were just doing this heading into next year, where would you put him? I will throw out these 3 I looked at some of my favorite catch-alls just to see where he ranked this year. In TPA, total points added, do you know which website has that?
It's ESPN, right?
No, it's NBA math.
Oh, okay.
Do better next time. He ranks first in total points added. In estimated plus minus from dunks and threes, he ranks first. In luck adjusted, real adjusted plus minus, he ranks second. And then in LeBron, which I'm leery of, but I really do love B-ball index. Stats that are named after players always, I don't know if there's any science behind that, but when they're named after players, it tweaks me a little bit. He ranks first in LeBron. And the other thing I'll say is if you were going to do this as a multi-year thing, Adam, he is 12th in 3-year luck adjusted, real adjusted plus minus. So please.
First, a side note that Chris Willis-Reed-Paul has officially re-entered the game. The way I want to look at this question, at NBA Math, we do the Crystal Basketball rankings. Preseason, we ask all the contributors to rank players and grade them and scale them based on how we expect them to play for the upcoming season. After the postseason, we ask them to grade how they played during the previous season. So one of those is looking solely at the contributions and availability and everything from the campaign in question. The other is more of a forward-looking exercise that allows you to be predictive and get a little bit bolder with your takes. So, yeah, he's been the best player in basketball this season. We've seen prominent outlets write about that and whether it's the case or if he's the MVP despite not being the best player in basketball, just the narrative factors and the availability factors and the quality of his team and all that. But I think if you look at it from the perspective of the forward-looking analysis, that you're still putting him behind a few guys. I would be pretty surprised, again, looking at like the crystal basketball exercise, because I think it's a good way to frame this question. If he finishes looking ahead to the 2021-22 season, if he's ahead of LeBron, if he's ahead of Steph, if he's ahead of Kawhi. Giannis probably too. Beyond those, I'm not sure that you're going to have anyone else.
Those would be the only names I consider. Maybe Luka Doncic you might throw in there. I
think Luka is going to be one of those guys battling for fifth with him.
Is Kawhi still in front of him? I think I'm letting
I don't think he should be. I think he will be.
I think I'm letting the Clippers' clipperiness cloud my judgment there, because I do think he should probably be in front of him. There's a chance maybe LeBron is the one that drops off behind him when looking at just sort of that group. And Harden could still be in the mix, but I do think the calculus changes for him and KD, given how the Nets are built now with all three of those stars.
I would say Steph and Giannis are the two guarantees.
Yeah, I'm 100%. Those are the only guarantees, I would actually say.
Yeah.
So hopefully that answered that question. More playoff questions we have here. Again, if anyone has a question live, let Adam know, because I made him the host, because he's the hostess with the mostest.
This is power.
This is interesting. I marked it down and then did only minimal research on it. At M_Bilal35 asks, which player who isn't well known in mainstream basketball conversations will have a breakout playoff run?
Wow, that's a great question.
I think Robert Williams probably counts.
That's a good answer. Not well known.
I want to say Nicholas Claxton, but
he's not going to get enough minutes.
Well, he brought that upon himself in game one because he fouled so much early on switches, but I don't think the Nets are going to trust him anyway. So yeah, I'd write him off. Marcus Howard is probably a good one in Denver.
Mikal Bridges.
Okay, that's fine. Please. I want to hear everything about Mikal Bridges, so I'm going to set my stopwatch for 60 minutes, and you need to use all of them.
I think we talked about how he might have moved out of the underrated category during the regular season for people who are paying very close attention to the NBA, but the Suns still haven't really broken through on the national scene, despite being a primary talking point when Chris Paul was being talked about as a potential MVP challenger for Nikola Jokic. People talking about Devin Booker as they always want to do. I don't think the nuances of that team are known yet. And Mikal Bridges now has one of the most marquee first round series imaginable, where he's going to be asked to check LeBron James and Anthony Davis and make his presence felt. And I think he's going to get a lot more love from national audiences, especially if they win that series. And then he's tasked with either slowing down Luka Doncic or Kawhi Leonard in the next round.
I never know how deep cut to do with these. Noah said in the chat, TLC or Shamet from the Nets. Those dudes, Shamet needs to not be just so much of game one was disastrous for him. And TLC started off the season so well, but ended off falling off a cliff. But yeah, TLC would be a good one just because he sort of came on for the Nets in the last year when they had their skeleton crew in the bubble. And he, in theory, is someone the Nets could use if they want to play him, a wing that can shoot and make threes while playing off the ball and then can check some different guys on defense. No one else really springs. I did mention Marcus Howard because the Nuggets are throwing everybody out there, and he is just an offensive lightning rod, as we saw in game 1 against the Blazers. I don't know who else springs to mind for you. You know what the problem is here is because a lot of these guys are not going to see minutes in the postseason enough to make that imprint. So let's just say
that's why I naturally go to like those second level stars. Like Tobias Harris is another name who comes to mind here.
That's two. He's on.
I think that's
contract.
Too well known already because of the contract.
I think
still, that's the tier I'm looking at.
I think Bryn Forbes has a chance because Milwaukee is so focused on diversifying their offense. They gave him some minutes in game 1. It helps that you can hide him on Trevor Ariza defensively, and he led the NBA. I think we've said this multiple times in points per touch this season. And look, Frank Ntilikina, he's going to lock down Trae Young. It's going to happen.
All right, so to that point, I actually think Kevin Huerter's a good answer here. Just a do-everything guy where if they actually do put Frankie Smokes on Trae Young throughout the game and force a secondary playmaker to emerge, that's a role that Huerter has capably filled this season.
That's a good point. Also, Frankie Smokes, have we made him too mainstream? I think we have.
On this podcast, for sure.
Huerter's a good one, though. I was going to say DeAndre Hunter, but I feel like he still has his draft pick cachet, and he's really only under the radar because he missed so much of the season, not because he's a bad player.
Exactly.
This is oh, that's a Grizzlies. Let's save the Grizzlies. Oh, this one's an easy one. At Rose on YT asks, has a 1 seed ever been swept in the first round? The answer is no. They have lost 5 times. The 2 times it happened in the best of 5 series, it went the full 5 games. In the best of 7 era or any best of 7 series, they've all gone at least 6 for the other 3.
The We Believe Warriors over the Mavericks was 6, right?
Correct.
Do the MVP question. Let's get it out of the way.
Let's go to something else first so that I could find the MVP question here because I didn't have it marked down. I didn't know you wanted to do it. Okay, this one from at Dario_Rivero is CP3 MVP. He is in my book. Go ahead, Adam.
That's all I got. Just a sigh of I'm resigned to this question always populating our mailbags. That's all I got. I'm just sad.
All right, well, that's a little disappointing, so I haven't found the other question that you wanted just yet. I would just say I don't understand the impetus to make it the CP3 MVP thing happen. Is it just we need to change the conversation so much? I don't, if you want to throw him in the top 5, I think that's fine. I don't know how you make a case for him over Jokic. I don't know how you make a case for him either over Embiid, Steph, Giannis.
Giannis, LeBron.
It's just, did LeBron play enough this season?
I don't know, but isn't the argument fairly similar where it's just about raising the level of a team, both with on-court contributions and leadership contributions?
I mean, I suppose. It is not showing up in the replies. I'm going to go back through our chat because I sent it to you. So here it is. If at MVP World asks, if every MVP vote from every single year of the NBA was cast at once, including second and third place votes, who would be the all-time MVP? And what would the next 9 years look like? My follow-up question would be, unless he's not including this year and wanted to just end it at 2030, why 9 years? That would bring us to 2029. I'm just very curious.
I'm very confused about the 9 years part in general. Are we predicting the next 9 MVPs? Are we predicting who's going to get the most MVP votes over the next 9 years? Because if that's the question, it's probably going to be Luka Doncic.
Cade Cunningham, maybe.
I'll allow it. I don't have an answer to
you just said you wanted to
all-time
do this question.
MVP. Well, I have a pseudo answer because there's no way that I have the hours and hours and hours of free time necessary to compile all of the MVP votes that are not in one place, especially because the ones from the 60s and 70s, we don't have the full breakdowns immediately available. But we do have something called MVP award shares, which is a basketball reference creation and looks at the percentage of the possible voting points that a MVP candidate received. So when 2015-16 Stephen Curry was unanimous, he got one full award share. Everyone else who has not been unanimous is getting 0.9 something award shares because they're still the runaway winner, but they're not getting every single possible first place vote. We do have all-time leaderboards for MVP award shares. So this is publicly available on Basketball Reference, but I'll just run through the top 10 and I guess see if anyone really jumps out at you as being a surprising inclusion or being way too low. Number 10 is Kobe Bryant at 4.2. Tim Duncan is 4.3. Karl Malone is 4.3. Shaquille O'Neal is 4.4. Bill Russell is 6th at 4.7. Magic Johnson is 5th at 5.1. Larry Bird is 4th at 5.6. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar 3rd with 6.1. Then a gigantic jump to Michael Jordan at number 2 with 8.1 and LeBron James at 8.8. It seems like I've always really liked this metric just because it is a pretty good approximation of NBA history just right off the cuff.
I was going to say, I'm probably a bit surprised that Larry Bird was so high, not that he was on the list.
Yeah, I think I'm a little surprised Bill Russell wasn't higher, but some of the MVP votes back in Russell's era were kind of strange. Like the fact that Wilt Chamberlain didn't win MVP during his 50-point per game season. Like that's always been weird.
He could have won Sixth Man of the Year though. If he was coming up with points per game, even if he was starting, could have just given him 6 minutes.
Well, considering he didn't miss a single minute of a single game, including overtime that year, and played more than 48 minutes per game, I feel fairly confident that he would not have been eligible for 6th Man of the Year.
No, I said even though he started games, clearly. Just give it to him.
Anyway. Okay, fair.
Give him the award. I guess that's called the scoring title. So,
yeah. He got thrown a bone somewhere.
At Carrigan Holt asks, is this the year we get an answer on the Donovan Mitchell versus Devin Booker debate? Whoever goes further in the playoffs is better. I would answer this question with maybe this is when we get the answer. It's not going to be based off who goes further in the playoffs. Look at who these two teams are playing. Losing to the Lakers is a lot different than beating the Grizzlies. If that's the scenario that's the most likely scenario, is what I would say.
Also, just don't judge an individual off a team's success.
Right. And it works both ways. It goes back to the Stephen Curry MVP debate. I'm not going to penalize him for what happens during the minutes that he's off the floor. He has no control over those unless he's just in foul trouble all the time. But I'm also not going to reward him completely, or rather, I'm not going to detract from the case of Giannis or Jokic just because their teams are better built around him. Is it Jokic's fault that he's not starting from a lower rock bottom than Stephen Curry?
I think basketball kind of naturally obfuscates this conversation a bit because the game is so fluid. So the example I like to use is in baseball with Mike Trout. Like if you're diminishing Mike Trout's accomplishments because the Los Angeles Angels are a cursed and incompetent organization that cannot make it to the playoffs, Mike Trout has nothing to do with that. He is doing absolutely everything that he can do in the field on the base paths when it's his turn to bat, but his teammates are not doing enough to get them into the playoffs. Sorry, what can he do to control that? And I think it's similar. It just feels a little different in basketball because it's more of a sport where the teammates are working together fluidly.
I will say, I think Donovan Mitchell has bridged the gap this year, but that this wasn't necessarily a clear debate before. If you just look at luck-adjusted RAPM over the last 3 years, Devin Booker ranked 78th overall, 11th in offense, in offensive RAPM. Mitchell ranked 135th and then 60th on offense over the past 3 years. This season, again, the gap has closed. Those were this year's stats. Booker is 11th on luck-adjusted offensive RAPM compared to Mitchell, who is 60th. For 3 years, his overall rank is 145 in luck-adjusted RAPM. This is Booker, and 10th on offense. Mitchell is 124th on offense, and then 408th overall. Been the better pull-up shooter this season, but only by a hair. Booker's been having a down year there. 48.8 effective field goal percentage on pull-up jumpers. Donovan Mitchell is 49.8. when you look at Donovan Mitchell has fewer turnovers this year. He's assisting on more of his team's buckets. A lot of that does have to do with CP3 coming into Phoenix. With Booker in general, he is the player that is better equipped to lead a team or lineups on his own. And we've seen that bear out in Utah, where when Donovan Mitchell's on the floor, they are winning those minutes and the offensive rating is through the roof, but they're only a +1 per 100 possessions. On the court without Chris Paul, the Suns have outscored opponents by plus 6.6 points per 100 possessions. I think it's close, and I caught a lot of shit when I said Booker was better than Mitchell when we had this debate previously. It's close, and you could probably pick either player, but I do think this is a season in which Donovan Mitchell needed to bridge a gap because it existed, and that gap probably no longer exists.
If I may zoom out a little bit to focus on the forest rather than the trees, these are both 24-year-old basketball players. We're not going to have an answer for who has the better career, who has the higher peak or whatever for a while longer. It is likely to go through some ebbs and flows in both cases.
That is not hot takey enough. That was vanilla. It was plain. I despised it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So we have two Warriors questions, which is fitting because their season ended dramatically and disappointingly, though I am still excited to watch playoffs. At Lost Runton 945 asks, how do you expect Klay Thompson's return to go after missing 2 entire seasons? And it is 2 entire seasons, but he last played basketball on June 14th, 2019. By the time he comes back in, when do we think the first game is going to be played next season? Probably in November, right? They're not starting in October.
I think they'll start in October.
And so end of October, though. So let's just, that's another 4 months on top of the 2. That's like 28 months, closer to 2 years and a half of not playing basketball. He tore his left, and then he had the ruptured right Achilles. What are your expectations for him leading into next season, Adam?
Look, I'd be lying if I said that I wasn't expecting a slightly diminished version of Klay Thompson. It's really hard to recover from an Achilles injury, much less to do so with that amount of time off and then to get back in the swing of things. Achilles injuries affect your explosiveness. They affect your change of direction ability. We've seen Kevin Durant overcome it because he's Kevin freaking Durant and he can shoot over anyone and he's just so ridiculously smooth and athletic regardless. Klay Thompson's game is very much predicated on the ability to zoom around the perimeter and find those marginally open spots where he can launch those catch and fire threes. He's always going to have that shooting ability, and it might even be better from all the time that he's had to practice standstill shooting, because what else has he been able to do for the last 28 months or however long that time frame has been to this point? He's always going to have that ridiculously quick release. One of the things that makes him so impressive is the ability to catch the ball while moving into his release rather than needing to gather and then fire, which just gives him that split-second advantage regardless of where the defense is. But locating to those spots, being able to play lockdown perimeter defense against a wide variety of matchups that requires lateral quickness and the ability to switch onto these quick guards and take the matchups that they don't want Stephen Curry having to face, I don't think that those are going to be there to the same extent. So I think we're looking at more of a spot-up weapon, kind of in like that Joe Harris mold, than the all-around weapon that he had become before these injuries.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Awesome.
I wrote down basically the same exact notes. It does help that even when you date back to the pre-KD era Warriors, 80+% of his made baskets were coming off assists, but you outline the context of so many of those baskets when you're talking about him relocating for threes, making cuts. Those might be more difficult for him to complete now. How fast is he going to be able to run on offense? He did always kind of have an intriguing post game, so maybe you could milk that more. His shooting will sustain. On top of those concerns, though, looking at how his points are going to come, even when he's off the ball, how many minutes do you play him? Is he ever going to be a 30-minute ever again? I don't want to rule it. You're shaking your head. No, I don't want to rule it out, but yeah, I would be shocked if next season, where are they going to start him off at? There's no way he starts off the year at just 25 minutes per game, right?
Probably not. And let's not forget that he'll be 32 next February. We're not talking about a 26-year-old recovering from these injuries anymore. And beyond that, like every 30-year-old has varying amounts of mileage. How many 30-year-olds have played, checking notes here, have played, I'm on the wrong table on the basketball reference page, have played 4,570 playoff minutes? Like, he's racked up a lot of mileage because of how deep the Warriors have gone year in and year out while he's been healthy.
And that's why I think that you can't just assume the Warriors, they get this year's pick, maybe they get Minnie's pick, James Wiseman comes back, do they re-sign Oubre, do they not? I think you can keep this together, add your picks, and be a contender just because Klay Thompson is coming back. I think you can be better. There's probably a path to being a 50-win team there, but if you want to be anything more and maximize Steph's prime, you need another star. So you need one of those picks to pop, or you need to move them, which leads me to the next two Warriors. The first of which is from at JimGen0318. Is Jordan Poole as solid a player for offense as he is for defense? Maybe I'm right. Is Jordan Poole a solid player on offense and defense? Let's read the question that way.
I think he can be. I'm not sure that the consistency is there on the defensive end in particular yet. He seems to have some good instincts, seems to have good hands, the ability to stay between his man and the basket. I don't see the possession-ending plays yet. I don't think that he is translating that positioning know-how and understanding of this scheme into highly impactful plays yet.
Yeah, I think he improved a lot on defense this year, though. We saw it a lot off the ball. He's also, for someone his size, like, he will block a shot from behind or at least contest shots around the basket. You need his offense to come together more. Shot better from three this year, over 35%. And we saw hints towards the end of the season he could do some of this stuff off the dribble. Over 74% inside 3 feet of the basket. They need all that, but you already mentioned it at the top of this. They need him to just be more consistent all around. I don't know if he can be that player without more really good players around him, which leads me to my next question. This one comes from at Dan Favali. Would you do James Wiseman, the Minnesota pick,
yes,
whether it's this year or 2022, and the Warriors' 2022 first round pick for Shai Gilgeous-Alexander? Who says no to that?
I'm not sure either side says no to that one.
The Thunder would be more likely.
I think the Thunder are more likely to say no. I would do that in a heartbeat if I were the Warriors.
Might be even more inclined to say that he has a better that he's better on defense right now. Maybe more consistent is probably the fair word there. Noah said to my trade, Sam Presti might say no. I agree that the Thunder are most likely to say no. Interesting. They don't need more picks. They could use, in theory.
Are you sure?
Yeah. I depending on how you feel about Moses Brown, they could use the big of the future in Wiseman. And this is going to be a higher end pick, unless you think that if the pick doesn't convey for Minnesota this year, and then you think they're going to be really good next year, that's where it gets dicey. What is interesting for the Thunder, though, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is extension eligible. I imagine Moses Brown is better than James Wiseman easily, Noah says. This season, probably, but long term, I think James
personally,
Wiseman,
I think Wiseman would be more likely than Moses to lead them to the promised land.
Oh God! All right. Moving on from that, if you're the Thunder, are you at the point in your rebuild where you want to already invest max money in someone? Not that Shai isn't worth it, but as soon as you give out that first max contract, it implies something timeline.
I think you do still, just because you have so many assets in the war chest that we've said before, as soon as a star becomes available, the Thunder are going to be a primary player for him, regardless of who it is, because they don't have any established pieces except for Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who can fill either guard slot. So whoever that star is, they're the organization that can throw 843 first-round draft picks at them.
Does the Wiseman plus Minnie's pick plus a Golden State pick in 2022 or even this year's, Minnesota's doesn't convey, it makes more sense to give them your lottery pick this year, unless it's number one or something ridiculous, and then Minnie's next year. But does Wiseman plus those two picks at least get Oklahoma City thinking?
probably. Just because those picks are strong enough and because Wiseman is an intriguing enough prospect despite the struggles during this rookie season. I still don't think they would do it, but I think they would think long and hard about it.
I'm probably with you, but Shea would be. I was just trying to find like an offbeat star for the Warriors to chase. That's not Bradley Beal or Zach LaVine or Karl Anthony Towns. Let's wrap up with some quick ones here, or what should be quick ones. At Hiroto Leo asks, who's the player with the best offensive rating in the NBA and the worst? I don't like citing individual offensive and defensive ratings, so I did a pseudo answer here. And Adam, do you know which site has offensive points added?
I think that's NBA math, right?
Yes, correct. Jokic led the league in offensive points added during the regular season this year with 463.04. In last place, 540th, Isaac Okoro at minus 185. Just not to be biased, I did look at luck-adjusted offensive RAPM. Jokic was also first in that at 2.93. In last, and this was 534, NBAShotCharts.com, which is where I get my RAPM stuff from. Teo Maledon was 534th at minus 2.71. There's nothing really to debate there. I guess the Maledon one surprises me a little bit. Not so much Okoro, but Maledon for sure.
I think the only thing I really have to add on the offensive points added stat is that because that's looking at relative to an average player, it doesn't always have the worst offensive players at the bottom so much as the least effective who play the most minutes. Because the worst offensive players don't play enough minutes to deviate far from zero. So really, the worst offensive players in the NBA are going to have like the single-digit negative scores.
I dig that. Another really quick one. Well, let's make these our last two. This one comes from at Hode Games. What are Thybulle's on-off ratings? Again, just relay here. For this season, the Sixers were 1.6 points per 100 possessions worse on offense when he played, and they were 0.9 points per 100 possessions worse on defense when he played. I think both of those numbers are explainable, where because he's not a high-volume shooter on offense and doesn't do anything else outside of take those threes, that his offensive upside is going to be limited there. He found himself in a lot of bencher-heavy units, and I would probably guess, I did not look this up, but he played a lot of minutes, more so than some of the starters did without Joel Embiid, and lifting up some of those lineups is going to be difficult. As we saw in their Game 1 victory against Washington, Joel Embiid was in foul trouble, got slammed when they had their bench-heavy units in there. This is the thing with guys who are so disruptive on defense, especially when they're on the ball, is it easier to neutralize them by taking them out of the action? He doesn't feel like someone you could do that with, but that would just be some of my off-the-cuff explainers of why are the Sixers statistically worse on defense.
It's the Avery Bradley argument all over again, basically. But have you heard that this Matisse Thybulle guy is good at blocking jumpers? Because I've heard that.
The only player who actually blocks jumpers is Chris Boucher. So no, I did not know that.
Fair.
Let's make this our last question. Comes from Raul Clement. DM'd me this one. Shout out to anyone who ever DMs questions. What do the Grizzlies need to do to take the next step? Is it just a matter of experience and health? Should they make a trade? I know Adam loves Dylan Brooks, but last I looked, the on-off splits and BPM view him as their worst rotation player out of Justice Winslow. Is there a wing scorer they could trade for as an upgrade there? I feel like Zach LaVine would be perfect, but he's not available. Any realistic options? That was a hell of a question, by the way.
It was. I feel like Zach LaVine is a good answer for a lot of teams, for a guy who could potentially take them to that proverbial next level because he's such a good from-scratch scorer who still manages to involve his teammates, and a lot of these more mediocre teams need that offensive firepower. But that said, I'm just going to stick with my old answer here, which is I don't want to see Memphis deviate from this core because I think the functional pieces are already in place across the board. Ja Morant is capable of making that leap. Jonas Valanciunas is just incredibly impactful and an all-around great player. Jaren Jackson Jr., if he's available, can bring this team to that next level. You have the role players and Desmond Bane and Xavier Tillman, who's already had a marquee game in a postseason environment now. There are so many good pieces on this Memphis depth chart that I don't really see the need to go chasing external help.
Yeah, they could definitely go more mid-end because they need more of a long-term wing. It doesn't look like it's Winslow, not even in their rotation right now, did not play in that game, Golden State, and I don't believe he's injured again. That's probably something I should have checked. Even Brandon Clark got a DMP coach's decision in that one. What I will say, and you could go more mid-end. I don't have names off the top of my head, but like Will Barton would be great for this team if he's healthy, opts out of his contract. The Grizzlies will only have cap space under very specific scenarios. Jaren Jackson Jr. stuff could be mildly concerning. Only played 15 minutes in that Golden State game. I know he's still ramping up after that knee injury, missed most of the year, so I don't want to downplay that. But his defense has not necessarily been as advertised. The movement and mobility can be there, but you look at the rebounding, the fouling is an actual problem, not physical enough in general, whether he's on the perimeter or around the basket. If you wanted to, because you have Jonas Valanciunas, because you have Xavier Tillman, because you have Brandon Clark, if I'm assuming you still believe in him, you could dangle Jaren Jackson Jr. and see if that gets you in a certain sweepstakes. Now, what I will say is, and it would be the same thing with Oklahoma City and all their assets, you need to pick a player that you know wants to be there. Or you need to go someone who's on a rookie scale deal, who you know will re-sign with you in restricted free agency. This would be a great Shai Gilgeous-Alexander destination. Even though maybe him and John Morant aren't the perfect fit, if Dylan Brooks isn't there, it gets a lot easier. But if you want, I think you could in theory use Jaren Jackson Jr. and not obliterate necessarily what you have built because Valanciunas is so good.
For sure. The other thing though is like the war chest has more than players in it for Memphis as well. Like they're still owed a first-round pick from the Utah Jazz that will not convey this year, but is only protected for the top 6 spots in 2022. They're still owed a first-rounder in 2024 from Golden State that's protected for the top 4 selections. Who knows what that team is going to look like
that
a couple of years into the future.
It's unprotected too, right?
It's only protected for the top 4. It's only protected for the top pick in 2025. It is entirely unprotected in 2026. Then the second-round obligations they have cancel each other out, the incoming and outgoing. So this is a team with just a plethora of intriguing young players with depth at every single position, with multiple incoming first rounders. Could very well go out and acquire a star. I just don't know that it needs to. But I agree. Like if the Timberwolves like make Karl Anthony Towns available, then yeah, dangle Jaren Jackson Jr. and maybe that 2024 Golden State pick and whatever else it takes, and see what you can do with Towns and Jonas Valanciunas on the court together, even if that's a deviation from the typical NBA stylings right now. But go get that top-end talent and then make it work.
See, I'd be against that because I'd be worried about that player leaving. I would want him signing a new contract, like a John Collins. What if you like him next to Valanciunas better than
right?
Jaren
I'm
Jackson
operating
Jr.?
under the assumption that would be part and parcel here.
If you still believe in Jaren Jackson Jr., which I do, I want, especially on offense, I want to make that clear. I think he'll be fine next season on offense. That's not a thing to worry about. More mid-end, like a Harrison Barnes from Sacramento, where you don't have to give up core pieces to get him. I guess the salary matching gets tough. If Boston was just looking to get off the money, just think Kemba Walker destination. I know that makes their backcourt small, but if you wanted to roll the dice on Kemba and aren't giving up any core assets to get him, the money then there is difficult. You don't like it, but the focus should be on more of a wing player anyway. But like a Harrison Barnes makes them exponentially better with, in theory, not knifing into sets. Do you have anything else that you want to hit?
Not particularly. I think we covered a lot here.
We did. Apologies to everyone whose questions we did not get to. Thank you, everyone, for sticking with us in Locker Room, especially with whatever technical difficulties that I was having earlier. Until next time, we leave it to shout out to the one, the only, way better than Jim, apparently, center in Oklahoma City. Their center of the future, apparently, according to Noah Odich, Moses Brown.